what the topic was talking about the psychological drain that training and competition can do to athletes, and really as part of their recovery, but also for their preparation and how they play. The massive stress that now maybe the psychological side of preparation comes into play when performing. So athletes have recognized that mental drain has a massive influence on how they perform, even their method of thinking, their especially in soccer, they've found that their ability, trying to really make their skills, their focus, their
Decision
attention,
making.
their concentration, their decision making was all massively impacted when their mental fatigue was increased, and that could have been down to was either sleep, playing like video games, all that kind of stuff in the lead up to a match. So it was looking at how can you mentally prepare and make sure that your battery isn't changed from a mental perspective, and that could be down to meditation, yoga,
Mm.
and the other aspects of prep.
As practitioners, how often do you get asked about heavy legs and lethargy before big games and big competition, and people confusing their preparation? Like I hear it over and over again. I prepared incredibly well. I carb loaded, but I feel so lethargic. I feel like I've got lead in my legs and I can't perform. And is that something that you have heard, Eva, Gemma?
Yeah, I was actually having a conversation this week with one of the hurlers, and we were talking about energy levels and why he feels like he's doing a lot of things well, but when it comes to the day of a match, it's like the energy is zapped out of him. His legs are heavy. Even his body language can reduce because, or be very negative, because he just feels like his preparation just hasn't gone the way he has been, despite putting all the good stuff in place. Um, so that was just this week, but it comes up quite often.
Yeah, it definitely is common. I think the hardest thing is because it's easy to put physical things in place because you can see, you tend to see the reward from those things like your training. And if your nutrition's right, you tend to get you can physically feel that from energy level point of view. And then when that's not working, you feel like you're just not doing something right in that area. And there's probably, well, more often than not much of a focus on the mental side of things, and recognizing how much of an impact that has.
Because
Yeah.
I really, really struggled with it for years and years and years, and I could never ever figure it out. And then it was only as I started looking into the fight and flight response and performance anxiety that I realized that when we uh, when we are really up for something, and when there's a huge level of excitement and anticipation, your state of arousal has a big impact on your hormonal state. And even just in advance of this discussion, I was just reading about the impact that the stress responses can have on your body. So adrenaline can cause the body to change where the distribution of blood is going. So blood can actually move away from the legs in some cases, which can cause like it starts to impact the availability of oxygen, and it affects how your perception of energy, and it affects how you feel your body is moving, and it can affect your strength. Now it is transient, but it's an amazing thing to think that the more relaxed you are, the less tension that you feel, the more you are in control of your emotions, as well as you possibly can be, or even knowing, and this was a big part, knowing that this was just a normal part of the adjustment to the competition and that this would pass was a massive thing for me, to kind of really just to stabilize your emotions and go, this will pass. This is okay. This is just something that I go through, and you'd be able to get on with it. It's because I get it enough. I get a lot of people contacting me and confusing nutrition with that feeling of lethargy. They want to use a gel, or they want to use caffeine gum, or they want to use a type of sports drink, or they feel like they didn't get the carbohydrate load right, but it has got nothing to do with nutrition.
Do you think it's lack of awareness though, or is there resistance to looking at that side of things and maybe appreciating the impact that it can have, the lack of awareness?
I don't think it. I don't think it's resistance. I think it's a lack of awareness. I mean, I could never have imagined personally that this was having this impact on me. It would be beyond my belief that the the thought that I was having, the focus and attention that I was giving was having a negative effect physically. I wouldn't have been able to comprehend that as a young athlete. But that's what I was doing. I was putting so much pressure on myself that it was causing a tension. It was causing a tightness. And this is why I talk so much. And this is why, even in our discussion with Paul Flynn, I talked about watching athletes being so relaxed, and how that there was specific activities put in place in order for the group to feel relaxed. Like, before All Irelands, before semi-finals of championship games, you're talking about video games there, Eva. There's PlayStation set up before the games. There was card games. There was table tennis, and like the whole space is set up in a way, music in the environment, like there's different music on, and you would swear you were going into a nightclub. That's what's done, and that was purely about distraction and relaxation.
I feel like the lack of awareness is massive, especially for someone that hasn't been exposed to mental preparation before, that they know what to focus on. Okay, it's getting the carbs in around your training sessions, around your matches. You're doing your mobility. So they have all that kind of physical prep, but they're probably not thinking of the mental side at all. Like, even having conversations with my brothers with a club at home, like they're not exposed to that at all. So they don't understand. They have a general understanding of what that looks like, but to actually put it into practice and action it is very, very different. So like, for even my brother coming back from playing from Dubai to play this summer, he's done all the physical side. I'm helping with his nutrition, but it's that probably I haven't done this in a very long time, feeling stressed around the situation that can have an impact on his performance. And it's just delving into that for, I'd say, a lot of athletes, even for if it was around training for a marathon, they haven't done it before. Their preparation is really good. They have the nutrition strategies, but the stress of the event, they might feel like their legs are just not taking them where they know that they're capable of.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think there's some really good points there, and I think as you were going through that, Eva, what coming into my mind was nutrition and your mental preparation. They're very closely connected, but you also need to be able to separate the fact that you've got your nutrition preparation done, and you need to get to a point within your nutrition strategies where you feel, I've got that covered. I don't actually need to overthink that anymore. It's practiced. That template has worked before. Now just focus on other areas of your preparation. Have you experienced it in any way yourself, Eva?
Well, for me, it's more like, if I did competitions, I probably wouldn't have it pushed myself that much. So I think the shock to the body and just being scared of what the event would be. Like I remember, was it last summer going into the first workout, and it was total overstimulation of my my nerves, and I started to cramp. Like within the first 5 minutes, my two calves started to cramp, and that was just total overstimulation. And wasn't until I could get off, relax, and then start to enjoy it a little bit more because I was totally revved up. So that's where I've kind of experienced it, that you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. So you're overwhelmed before you even do anything.
I think you've touched on something really important there in terms of overstimulation of the central nervous system. And you've brought up cramp. And look, we're not going to talk about this at length, but just again, how somebody, if they weren't aware of that, would think, oh, I was hydrated. You know, I've obviously got an electrolyte imbalance here.
100%. And that's what people were saying to me, like, oh, did you take these electrolytes? It's like, that's not the issue. I know it's not the issue. And it was probably with the lead up to, like, if I would have probably stretched, mobilized for 35 minutes before I trained, and I was probably going into that cold nearly, because there's so many people around you, there's so many things going on, and you start to, well, my practices actually weren't as good as it was. And it wasn't until I kind of reflected on it after, so okay, right, one, it was probably overstimulation. Two, I probably didn't mobilize as much and stretch that what I required compared to the people that were on my team.
I think you've again, this is good shit out of you, boy. I think the environment part that you've just brought up is also so relevant here, because you think about what your body is used to experiencing and what your body is used to seeing, even visually, and even what you're hearing. And I remember just the this is not to bring about any major debate from people watching, but you know, there's a lot of controversy about Dublin having Croke Park as their main playing or main home ground, and just how familiar and comfortable, how everything has its place and order for that group and for that team. And there was no doubt in my mind that familiarity, even things like having played big games there and know what to expect, the noise from the crowd, the running order is slightly different, and you know how to be able to deal with those situations where you're not actually overwhelmed. And I just think those are the things that really good athletes, really good teams, and really good environments are so good at preparing their groups for. And it just puts people and puts the players at ease. But it's again, what can you control, which lowers that state of stress.
Even probably, Jamie, you could talk about this more, but what I recognized last year was going to different grounds and different dressing rooms, and the team have never been in there before, and they're smaller than what they're used to. It can really influence even just the dynamic of the dressing room before they go out to play. Gemma, like, how would you feel like going into a ground you didn't know, and maybe the space is smaller, these are all bunched in, like, would that impact how you would feel before getting out onto the pitch?
Yeah, you can see they intentionally do that as well with the way dressing rooms, the way they set them up and make them uncomfortable. It's interesting to see the differences between home and away. But
Were
I
you
suppose
unsettled a lot of the times, Gemma?
unsettled.
Yeah, unsettled. But did it put you off your game?
I don't think so. I expect to go into shitty dressing rooms, right?
I I can imagine you going in, what the
What
fuck?
was
Let's go
this?
to this fucking shit on.
Maybe.
Are we going to talk about this photo actually?
What?
Your new photo, the pose. I'm here.
She goes, show a better attitude. That's
Should have been like this.
not that much. She goes,
Oh, I thought you would have given it like that one.
there's loads of different ones.
I know it was great.
Best
It was
of a bad
really,
bunch.
really good. I really liked it. It was super. What comes to mind, like when we were going to have this conversation about the preparation or the recovery, whether it be emotional performance or emotional preparation, emotional performance, emotional recovery. What was coming to your mind? What did you think we were going to talk about?
I was thinking of was probably after a match, the emotional, or not the emotional drain, the mental drain of the lead up if it was a big game, the experience of if it was maybe your first massive quarterfinal or semi-final, and then when people talk about even just say they won the Olympics, and that like what the hell happens now? This isn't what I expected to feel, as a total anticlimax. And then they can nearly go into not a state of depression, but it's more like, okay, what do I do with myself now? What's next? So how do you recharge the batteries from a mental side?
Yeah.
If well, one, if they have nothing else coming up for a while, or two, there's another big game.
Very good. Yeah, because that's what came up actually when I was researching. There was a couple of papers came up about it was even post-Olympic blues was the title of one of the research papers, and it's been talked about now. It's been talked about with the Women's World Cup and how teams manage the expectation, manage the pressure, and the emotional toll of each game. And like I feel this conversation was really worth having, even after talking to James, and James talking about the emotional toll of the environment, the travel, the media, the press, the photographers. And I just think it's such an important conversation. I think that if we talked about awareness, if there's people, young athletes out there that are listening to this and they can begin to draw their awareness to the impact of these stimuli and these stimulus on them and how they feel and how they perform. And even like that's going back to my feelings of heavy legs. Once I knew it was going to happen or it could happen, it wasn't me fighting it. It was the acceptance of this is so you actually move through it so much quicker. There's a guy I really hope we can get on. He's an All Ireland winning hurler, a great guy, and he's having serious problems with cramp, and he reached out to me over the years. He reached out to me, and this guy is like an all-star, phenomenal athlete. And I messaged him recently, and I asked him, how are you getting on, and how did you deal with the cramp? And he said his response was, I just learned to deal with it. I just actually, and it was amazing when I just learned to deal with it and get fucking on with it. I noticed it happened less and less. And I think it was some insight for me because you can torture yourself with this stuff. You can really can. But when you accept the circumstance, when you accept all of these things are going to be present in preparation for games, and there's this whole thing about, do you let the occasion affect you? So I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that, Gemma?
No, I was just thinking as you're saying that, then it's like this balancing act of being able to endure all of like the psychological stresses that are on you before you even get to a match. So it's balancing that side of it along with what are you going to put in place to manage it then as well. Because obviously the more you're exposed to that kind of things, you're going to be able to deal with them in a much better way than someone that maybe can't handle whenever the going gets tough. Um, like what was it for you and that made that biggest
Well,
even realization?
I didn't have anybody really to talk to about this type of thing, and I think it was very much figuring out a process. It was figuring out like how do I spend my time in the day before a game? how do I spend my time on game day? What distracts me? Am I going to be just sitting around the house? Am I going to be active in some way? You know, the difference between going and doing something, like even as simple as picking up shopping or going looking at clothes or whatever it might be, a movie, something that you can pick out. Like, I began to recognize that things that made me laugh were much more beneficial than things that were motivational. You know, I didn't need to hear anything related to effort or work ethic or work rate. I didn't, you know, that wasn't going to help me. So just recognizing, and I've heard you use it quite a bit, you know, the soothing concept. For me, it was about figuring out what takes my tension down. And that was me in a different state, in a different stage. But as I began to work with athletes, like for the last 5 years, and particularly, I would say particularly in the latter phase of my time at Dublin and Leinster, I began to recognize how valuable it was for athletes to be aware of these things and to even pool these concepts and ideas together, so that people became really clear about the value of nature, of the sea, of music, of yoga, of mindfulness. And then you realize there's so many ways. And this is what I'm actively doing now with athletes, trying to to develop personal preparation, like emotional preparation plans in place, where people begin to identify this and are not, and you talked about this, Eva, a little bit earlier, who are not actually afraid to talk about it, not actually afraid to say, I actually notice when I go down to the Dodder, to the river, you know, water, getting close to water, or like you recognized, the forest, the way that impacts your senses. You know, there's mushrooms and things there that you like to go pick in
And eat
Licking trees.
overhead.
you like to climb the trees, don't you? As well, like you've got your favorite branch tree.
Putting off branches and
Whatever gets the job done.
Oh,
grow.
this is my favorite one today. This is just, I'm so happy we didn't postpone it. Now there's, you know, when you go in and you see there's breath work, you know, when you speak to sports psychologists, there's breath work, there's visualization, there's deep relaxation techniques, there's getting your self-talk right, there's understanding the impact of your own body language on your own physiology, on your own hormonal status. And now there's so much information there. And you know, listen to Dan Carter, or you know, the Diary of the CEO, and you're listening to people who talk about performance, or the High Performance podcast, and people now are openly talking about this, and have been doing it for the last, this has been a part of their preparation for the last 20 years. But yet it's still not, so it's not widely appreciated or understood.
So if someone is listening to this now and where would you say that or what are some of the questions that they need to ask themselves, or where would they start with trying to?
Well, but I think where it starts is beginning to recognize your state, your physical and your mental state, and recognizing your thoughts. And that's a very simple thing to do if you begin to monitor or track it. And that's actually just writing down, what was my state of mind like this week? How did I plan my week? How did I spend my time? Was I active? Was there too much downtime? Who were the people that I spent the most of my time with? How did that make me feel? How did I notice my physical state? You know, did my physical state feel relaxed, or was I tense, or was I stressed? And then it's about, and it's a journey. Like the amazing thing about it is, and I've done this practice, I've asked I asked hundreds of athletes what their plan is around their preparation for performance, and there's a lot of overlap, but most is different. You know, I, an athlete very recently said he goes and he visits his grandparents. You know, he spends time with his grandparents because it just grounds him and it brings him back to just understanding the important things in life, and that's what his grandparents does for him. And I thought that was really nice. Like, just it's that awareness about what will make you feel good.
In motorsport, it's not the same, I suppose, fueling strategy as it would be in team sports or endurance, but then it does, from the physiological impact that it has, is coming from the stimulus that's on them and the psychological stress that's on the body, and trying to kind of highlight those stresses a bit more, and recognize how important it is to put certain things in place so that they can perform and feel that. But this, what you mentioned there about the subjective ratings of your performances, like a lot of people could have, like we mentioned before, the same nutrition prep going into a match, and then if they were able to see that if I'm preparing in the same way that way, but I've got these differences in subjective ratings in the games, just to kind of highlight over time for them to see why these changes might be happening. And that was something that they did in motorsport recently.
It's really good. That's really good. And I know there's a lot of professional teams now try and monitor they have like their fatigue index, and then they have ratings that are more focused on perception of energy and how people are feeling. And I think that there is more of an awareness on it, for sure. There certainly is within most professional sporting organizations.
Probably less of an awareness on what the individual does then with that. That what you're talking about, creating their kind of own story for how they prepare, and recognize that. I think there's definitely, like, even in the League of Ireland, like there's loads of emphasis on you rating yourself, but it's then what do you do with that information, and how do you manage and put strategies in place to help with that.
So in terms of recovery, the reason I'm bringing that up is I had a really interesting conversation with an athlete about maybe a month ago, and we've talked about nutrition and lifestyle being really closely connected to your overall preparation, how you're feeling, but that it's important to be able to separate the two. He talked about how his behaviors, if he had a bad performance, if he did not perform well, how he would use food as a way to try and comfort him after not feeling like he performed at his best, and how much worse he felt when he made bad choices. It was the big, the takeaway and bad food the next day, or it might have been alcohol, and that was a type of a way of addressing it. And I thought, when I talked to him about a way of actually using a completely different set of tools and a very different set of activities to deal with that really connected with him. And he just, it was this moment where he realized, I've actually been sabotaging myself, and I have never really considered my emotional recovery. Whether we win or whether we lose, I don't have a process. I don't have a way of coming down or using, if you could have that takeaway, or you could have that pizza, as long as it didn't make you feel guilty, or it didn't make you feel worse, that's not the issue. But it's knowing, what are you going to do to make yourself feel like I've learned something from that performance, or these are my actions. And I know, just back to the motorsport again, Gemma, that there's a really defined process. There's a around that. Maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight to what that looks like for motorsport athletes.
Yeah, because it's easy, I suppose, when he put all his prep going into the event, and when it's over, it's nearly just this off switch that's the job done. But then it's recognizing that, I suppose, how do you feel and how do you manage everything that's come after that, and what does your reflective practice look like? What is you been able to just, I suppose, switch off yourself from the actual event, but then switching on what's going to allow you to feel good. But yeah.
But just more specifically, they have this game or this performance analysis where they will say, how was your preparation? How did you feel you performed? Was there something that you would change? What did you learn from the experience? Is something that you do differently? And I think just asking yourself a couple of questions afterwards, that being one part, is very beneficial. But then, I said to this particular athlete, who do you speak to about your game? Because that can very heavily influence how you feel. Like, if it's a very critical member of the backroom staff, then you're not going to feel particularly good about yourself. But if it's somebody who's able to point out objectively, here are the key things that you did very well, here are the things that you can work on, that's completely different. So knowing who to speak to, knowing how you're going to eat, going to the sea, going to the forest, whatever it might be, seriously, like whatever it might be that are important practices. Well, what's your process, and what will help you recover emotionally? What's the time, and active recovery being such an important part, whereas it's not just lying on the couch, and it's not just eating food. There's an active process around recovery for your brain and for your body physically.
I feel, well, generally, when you're going into either teams or with athletes, they often neglect that next day, or they're seeing it as a rest day, as a day of, okay, I'm not doing anything. And even just conversations this week that I've been having with a couple of athletes is really focusing on, it is as important as the day before a match. I know there's a lot of preparation from a fueling perspective and mental preparation, but the day after, you have to consider that as if it's your match day plus one or your performance day plus one, and that has to have another process there to build in. And there generally isn't a process. So it's, okay, what couple of steps can we do and action them, even if it's under the 4 hours of recovery? What are the important actions for you to do under them?
Glad you brought it back to that, Eva, because I definitely was neglecting it. I remember you've brought up a really interesting point. There's one particular rugby player that he wore a monitor to SenseWare, and it can estimate calorie expenditure really accurately, based off heat and based off heart rate. And what we found, the recovery processes, the healing processes, everything as a result, even his resting metabolic rate after the game, he was still burning about 2,000 calories above his basal metabolic rate because of the recovery. And for him to be in calorie balance was about 4,000 calories the day after a game. So it was, and what happens with so many athletes, depending on whether they win or depending on whether they lose, they might sleep in, they don't have any active process, and they're putting themselves and putting their recovery massively in jeopardy and at risk, and putting their ability to perform again. They're sending themselves back.
And if you've gone into a game with a lot of stresses as well, and your RP within that game is much higher, even though it was the same as what you usually would have done, but you felt that the recovery is going to be even more demanding then as well. So it's it has a knock-on effect in all areas leading up and the recovery process.
Really good. So we will bring this Live Like an Athlete. I think this is our science version, our insight. We'll bring it to a close at some summaries. What have been your takeaways? Gemma, you're here in front of me now. What have been your takeaways? And you made a really good point around the actions. What do you think is the really important messages out of this conversation for people?
The importance of self-awareness is definitely stood out for me. If you can recognize what allows you to feel good and what allows you to not just perform well, but go into feeling confident into your training and your games, and recognizing the early signs of mental fatigue. It's not just, I know we mentioned heavy legs, but even just lack of focus and just overall not feeling your best. Even mood can be impacted, and if that's changed, just being self-aware and I suppose management strategy is going to be individual, but if you can first at least recognize that you do feel different or just not your best, that you're dealing with it, and you're putting certain things in place for you that can allow you to make a change.
Really good. Really good. Eva?
I think, Gemma, you explained all that better than I ever could. So I'll just add maybe another small element on it. So I think the mental preparation towards a game or a competition, but also then after having a good process in place that covers all aspects of performance, from mental, physical, emotional, and even then from a nutrition side as well. So not neglecting that, having action points for each step and build on that to get yourself back to a place that you are ready to perform again.
I think your mention there of game day -1, game day +1. I think, even getting into that language and looking at the days and having a bit of a process around it. I remember Kevin McMenamin, the Dublin footballer, talking to me about the optimum state of arousal. And without getting into any of the science of it, Gemma said about what makes you feel good, and not being overhyped, not being lethargic, but being in that sweet spot. And that does come from self-awareness. And I would just encourage anybody who's listening to think, like, the big action is take a little bit of time to think: body, what allows me physically to perform at my best; mind, what allows me to mentally and emotionally perform at my best; and then what are the key activities that allow me to physically recover and then to mentally recover, so that you begin to recognize at a whole different level what allows you to be at your physical and mental best when you're performing. So I know we didn't talk about nutrition in any major detail. It's still a vital part of it. It's still one of the key pillars. But this was a really valuable conversation. I'm really happy we had it, and I think there's a lot of really good value in it. Any of the girls, do you want to add anything? Aoife, is there anything from your perspective as an athlete?
Nothing particular, but I think just to add that if you're starting from the beginning and you've nothing in place at the moment, is trying different things out and finding what works for you is important, because you could try one thing and it doesn't work, but you continue to do it because everyone else is doing it. But being able to be confident in your own procedures, I think, is important.
What stood out for you in the conversation? I mean, you're an elite athlete yourself, Aoife. What came to mind when we were talking through the different elements of your emotional state and performance?
I think it highlighted a bit that I've kind of neglected this, especially since I stopped playing for a few years, and after coming back now, I notice my self-talk isn't as good as it used to be. And when Gemma mentioned body language as well, it's if you have a bad game or you do something that you wouldn't have done before, it's being able to have the positive self-talk to bring yourself back from that and not let it bring you down and affect your performance for the rest of your game. That's, yeah.
That brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you, everybody.